Hi, welcome to Teching It Up with Mark. Today we're going to use an AI agent to query business data and send those results to a user. So this is an example which I think is quite cool and shows how easy these AI agents are to build and do something that would take an expert before, such as myself, to generate the SQL queries and send that back to a user, and how we could do that whole process for them. Now I'm using pydantic AI to help me out here, and I'm just doing this in a Jupyter notebook, but later on, if this video is popular, we'll try to set this up as a web server or something like that, so we could see how that could potentially be used in production, but we have a lot of details which would be needed for that. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. So here I'm on my K2 server, and I have my database of K2 applications. In this example, we're going to look at two tables in particular to query them, and that's going to be in this reporting workflow, workflow reporting dot workflow instances and workflow reporting dot user task. So this would be if you want to report on some extra information about your workflows, when they started, stopped, their status, and the data in the K2 process instance table doesn't suffice, you might have an additional table for this. So I filled this up with some data from ChatGPT. So process instance ID, that would normally not be a GUID, of course, but it is here. What is important to note here is this workflow user task table is a child table to this workflow instances. So for every row in the workflow user task, there should be a workflow ID that matches up with a workflow from this process's instance table. I think this is actually going on workflow ID here to workflow ID, but that's adequate for this example. So what we're going to do is write an AI agent to query the data here and return that answer to the user. So that will be the user input something in plain English, plain text, whatever. Then the LLM comes up with a SQL query for us. We execute that SQL query. We take the results of that SQL query and send that back to the LLM for a nice formatted answer. So how I'm doing that here is with pydantic AI. And yeah, we'll go through step by step. And I'm also doing that in Python with Visual Studio Code. I hope this is big enough. And we are also doing this with a Jupyter notebook so we can go step by step. If this is successful or people like this video, maybe I can set this up to actually be in a process or on a web page or something. It should be pretty easy from here. So the first thing we want to do is first add the database schema so the LLM knows how to generate this queries. I'm doing this using the create statement. So this was on the pydantic AI, one of the examples that I just modified from there, and then I used ChatGPT to help me. But for this particular one, I'm using these workflow reporting tables that I had before. So I just went to each table, went to script table as create to, new query editor window, and I took this part of the query. I didn't take everything here with the altering tables and the primary keys and things like that, but I'm sure I could have, or at least the constraints. And I added that to the DB schema. So I'm just going to run that. Now we have a variable called DB schema set. And this could be several schemas here. I only used two tables here for questions about this table. The next thing we do, and this was also in the pydantic AI sample, is add some sample queries to it in this request response format. So I just kept that in as is, made sure it was in Microsoft SQL query syntax. And then I believe that is. If not, I should change that to help generate our queries. Okay, so we have another variable with SQL examples. We then use pydantic to help create some models or classes for defining our responses. So these are pretty simple. So we have, based off the base model, this is that pydantic class. We have the SQL query and an explanation field. And this just sets the type. I actually don't know enough about pydantic to say what that is, but copy and pasting worked well enough here. I also have a class for invalid request. Once again, this was in the pydantic example. Then we can define our agent. So here, what's interesting is the agent we use. So whether that's, I don't know, Grok or Gemini or OpenAI, that's what I'm using here because I have an OpenAI key that I had to pay for. I don't know a free one. I could probably try running a local LLM if I wanted to. Maybe I will do that in the future because I think it costs 1 cent a request. To do this. So maybe after a while it might get kind of expensive. So you do need an OpenAI key. I put that here in a .end environment table, and then it was able to pick that up from there. So I also had to import a few classes for this, such as typing. Once again, I'm not familiar with this. This is some of my first time working with some of these classes in Python, but so far so good. And also with AI helping me out, it really does a good job. Okay, we then define our system prompt. So the system prompt is basically what goes into the LLM along with what the user actually types. So in this case, we're giving it, given the following MS SQL table of records, your job is to write a SQL query that suits the user's requests. Please make sure not to use limit in the request. So what we have here is the DB schema, the variable, and some SQL examples. Today's date, I guess to help us write the SQL queries. I'm not sure. They also had that in the default request. Something that I did, or in the default pydantic AI example, one thing I did add myself is I noticed that it kept on generating queries with limit when I wanted like the top row or top one. And I made sure to actually specify that in these system prompts, not to include limit in the query, so it stopped doing that afterwards. So I'll build that. We then build the methods to connect to a SQL database. So we're using this AI OODBC and this async context manager. We have a connection to my database. This is a pretty general password here, so I'm not worried about that. We define that connection. This could be all be generated pretty simple, easily from an LLM or whatever. And then we actually execute that query using this execute query where we have the query method. Probably not the safest thing to do. If I was doing this in production, I would definitely limit this to select queries. So I would say something in here such as please only use select queries, no create, no delete queries to make it much safer. So please be aware of that. But yes, this is what we will actually need to execute the queries. So I have that there. I just ran that. Next thing we need to do is ask a question, send it to the LLM along with the system prompts, and see what the SQL is generated. So the first question I asked here is how many requests did the IT department submit? So maybe I'll do a different department if I just look over the rows here. Or I'll say how many, well, not user task. Oh, we could do that too. How many user tasks are pending? All right, so I'll put that in, sending it to the LLM here with this agent run, and I put that prompt in. We could see we have the query that it generated here. So let me just run that directly. See what we get. I'll execute these both at the same time. We have 13 pending tasks. You could see that down there. All right. So now we'll execute this SQL query. It also came out with the result of 13. And then we'll finally send everything back to the LLM so it can give a well-formatted answer. So let's do that. We put in some more system prompts, or a summary prompt, and we could put this in the system prompts if we wanted. We specify our agent again, and look at the result here. Summary of results. Certainly, based on your question, there are currently 13 user tasks pending. This indicates there are moderate workload waiting to be processed or completed. And it has some insights with 13 pending tasks. So that's pretty cool. Let's see. Let's see if we can ask it something more interesting. Well, the business data isn't that interesting. Let's see how it did with this. It looks like it did one workflow for a process, so that's not too interesting. Always by different users. Okay. How about we ask it, and not just about one, can you give me a summary of workflows submitted by department? All right, so this is something not just a count. Let's rerun this. Generating a SQL query. Okay. Let's see if this works in SQL. It does. Awesome. A nice little chart from an LLM. Now let's go execute that query. So we get the results here. And now let's send this back to the LLM. It's not fast. That's one thing about it for sure. All right, cool. And now we got a nice formatted response from the LLM. All right, workflows by department, total workflows. The finance department has a balance of distributed across workflow stages. Yeah, it's just making some stuff up there. Maybe I would take off this note of notable insights here, but yeah, you could see how this is pretty cool and pretty powerful, and it'd be pretty easy to switch to another database. So I did this for the workflow reporting databases, but I could easily fill that with another scheme. There could be a question beforehand to go get the schema of that. I could have that saved somewhere if needed for all my business data. I just have to make sure they point at the right system, and maybe I can even help it out with some mappings. So for me, I thought this was a super awesome way to make an AI agent with business data that you probably already have while using K2 or Nintex automation. And you could see how easy it is to do something that would be quite complicated before in generating these queries, and how it could be done like dynamically. This, to point out, this is obviously not production ready or anything like that, but yeah, it's pretty cool. Even if you're only using it for your customers by yourself, it could save a lot of time. So I hope you enjoyed the video. It's been a while since I've done a video. Life keeps coming up and getting in the way. Please like, comment, subscribe, and tell me if you want me to do more videos, especially on this subject. I really like using it, so it's fun for me. Have a good day. Thank you.